There's a sound old masonry makes when it has begun to fail. It is not a crack, it is not a crumble. It is a faint hollow ring when you tap the surface with the knuckle of your index finger. The way I have been taught since I was 19 years old by a stonemason from Shaftesbury, Vermont, named Craig McInnes, who is now 84 and who still walks the cemeteries of Bennington County reading headstones the way other people read the New York Times. The hollow ring tells you that the bond between the stone and the mortar has failed, even though the surface looks fine. The stone is still sitting there. The mortar has let go. If you don't repoint it, water gets in. If water gets in, the freeze-thaw cycle finishes the job. The mortar started. The stone falls. It falls usually in February. It falls usually at 4 in the morning. It falls when no one is watching. My name is Judith Kerrigan. I am 52 years old. I am an architect in Boston, and for 28 years I have made my living doing one thing: reading buildings that other people do not know how to read. I read timber frame barns that were built before the Civil War. I read federal townhouses whose gutters have been replaced 5 times and whose bones have not been touched since the Grant administration. I read mill complexes in Lowell that the National Park Service pays me to inventory. I read buildings the way a radiologist reads an MRI. I look for what is load-bearing and what is partition. I look for what is original and what is a later repair. I look for what is failing and what is failing slowly enough to fool everyone, except the person who knows where to put the knuckle. I keep an office in a converted rope warehouse in Charlestown. I keep a drafting table my father built me in 1987. I keep a Yankee screwdriver. I bought at a garage sale in Stowe in 1996. I keep a Leica Disto laser measuring tool that is the only piece of technology in my life I trust completely. This is the story of how my brother Henry was going to get married in our family's 164-year-old farmhouse in Bennington, Vermont, and how, on the Wednesday before the wedding, while I was doing what I always do at that house, measuring things, tapping things, looking for the hollow ring, I found 5 amendments to the operating agreement of the family LLC that I had never signed. I found a HELOC of $650,000 drawn against the house. I found a deed filing that transferred 14 acres of the family land to a company called Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC. I found all of this in the same way. I find a failing stone wall on a project in Cambridge, or a roof rafter that was undersized in a renovation in Newton. I read the documentation. The documentation did not match the structure. I want to be very clear about what this story is and what it isn't. This is not a story about a screaming match at a rehearsal dinner. There was no scene, there were no raised voices, there were no plates thrown. There was a wedding. The wedding happened on Saturday, September 14, 2024, in a farmhouse with 164-year-old post and beam framing, with no Marisol, with Henry at the altar next to his best man, with the same officiant who had married my parents in 1978, with me in a navy dress I had been meaning to wear to something for 10 years. There was a wedding. The wedding was smaller than it would have been on Friday. There were 239 guests on Friday's seating chart. There were 46 on Saturdays. The seating chart is in my drafting room in Boston. The Saturday chart has 46 names in pencil. The Friday chart has been burned. I knew what was happening 5 months before my brother's fiancée understood. I knew. I let her keep working. I was not being passive. I was being methodical. There is a difference. By the time she understood, she had filed 5 unauthorized amendments. By the time she understood, our family LLC had a $650,000 encumbrance on a house that should never have had a mortgage. By the time she understood, a 2-acre parcel of land that my father had walked me across in 1993 to show me where the barn foundation had been was on file at the Bennington County Clerk's office in the name of an LLC registered in Delaware by a woman whose 2 previous husbands had each ended up divorced within 36 months of their wedding days. Their houses had gone with them. I knew this. I had been counting it the way I count the stones in a wall. I want to tell you what I counted, why I counted it, and what it cost. It is not a small cost. Before I take you back to the Wednesday before the wedding, a quick word. This channel is the only place I tell these stories. I do not do podcasts. I do not do live shows. I do not travel to give talks. I sit at the same drafting table my father built me in the year I started architecture school, and I write the way I would write for a colleague. If that sounds like your kind of story, tap like. It does more than you think. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Ring the bell if you want the morning a new one drops. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I read every comment. I read them slowly. Sometimes a comment tells me something I need to know about a character 3 stories from now. Tonight, I'm taking you back to a Wednesday in September of 2024, when I drove the 217 miles from Boston to Bennington in my old Volvo wagon, parked on the gravel drive in front of a 164-year-old post and beam farmhouse, and pulled a folding ladder out of the back. Let me take you back to that Wednesday, to before the 5 unauthorized amendments, to before the deed filing, to before the year of slow rearrangements, to a morning when I still thought I was coming up just to do a structural walkthrough of the house I had been restoring for 20 years, before my brother's wedding on Saturday. The house at 1147 Mentor Road, in Pownall, Vermont, 4 miles east of Bennington and 12 miles north of the Massachusetts border, was built in 1860 by a farmer named Heman Pratt. It is a 1.5-story, 28 by 32-foot post and beam farmhouse on a fieldstone foundation. The ridge beam is one solid timber, 28 feet long, 12 inches by 16 inches at the smoking chamber, hand-hewn with an adze on 3 faces, sawn on the 4th. The summer beam is 12 by 16, also one solid timber, tenoned into the girts with oak pegs. I have personally replaced 7 of in 20 years of restoration. The floor framing is 2 by 10s at 16 inches on center, which was overbuilt for 1860. The floor joists are continuous, running the full 14 feet from the east foundation wall to the west, with the bearers cut into the posts in a way that is unusual for Vermont and is closer to the Massachusetts River tradition. There is a center chimney of brick, original 22 inches square at the cap, with a corbelled brick shoulder 3 courses down from the cap that nobody else has ever noticed except my father and me. The clapboards are original, 3/4-inch white pine, hand-split, weathered to a gray that is not paint. The roof sheathing is original pine plank 1 by 8s, with the original cedar shingle under 2 layers of 20-year asphalt that I have been slowly peeling back since 2004. The windows are replacement, 6/6, mid-1920s, installed after the originals were destroyed in the 1938 hurricane. There are 42 windows in the main house and 3 in the L. I have measured every one. I know the exact distance from the dining room window to the floor. It is 38 3/4 inches. My father measured that for my mother so the cats could look out. My mother kept that measurement in her handwriting on a piece of paper taped to the dining room wall until the wall was repainted in 2012. The paper is in a drawer in my office. Heman Pratt built the house for his wife and 6 children. He sold it to a man named Ezra Wickham in 1879. Ezra Wickham sold it to a man named Forbes Bagor in 1903. Forbes Bagor sold it to my grandfather Patrick Kerrigan in 1931 for $400, in cash, in a transaction that is recorded in the Bennington County Land Records in Volume 73, page 227. My grandfather paid for it with money he had made cutting cordwood for the Bennington brickyards. My grandfather died in 1956. His son, my father, inherited the house and the 17 acres around it. My father kept the house through a war, through a divorce, through a child, through the death of his first wife, through the marriage to my mother, through the long, slow accumulation of children, pets, snowblowers, road salt, 2 mortgages, a refinance, a home equity line of credit that he paid off in 1998, a back porch that was added in 1983 and removed in 2012, a wood stove that he switched to in 2002 and switched back from in 2015, a Federal Pacific breaker box that was replaced in 2019, the year after he died. My father's name was Benjamin Daniel Kerrigan. He was born on the floor of this house on December 14, 1949, delivered by a midwife named Marguerite Beaulieu, who lived to be 103 and who came to every Kerrigan birthday party until she stopped driving in 2009. My father was the youngest of 4 children. He had 2 brothers and a sister. He was the only one who stayed in Vermont. His brothers went to Boston and Albany. His sister went to Hartford. He stayed. He took over the farm. He and my mother raised chickens for 26 years. He worked for the State of Vermont Agency of Transportation as a civil engineer from 1974 until he retired in 2012. The same agency, the same office on South Main Street in Bennington, the same yellow pickup truck, a 1988 Ford F-150 until 2012. He had a white beard by 2012. He had a white beard by 48. He had the same white beard when he died. He died on October 26, 2018, of an ischemic stroke in his sleep, in the master bedroom of the house at 1147 Mentor Road. He did not have Alzheimer's. He did not have dementia. He had high blood pressure that he managed with a pill he took every morning at 6. He forgot the pill one morning. I do not know which morning. I will never know. The autopsy said the stroke was massive. The autopsy said the time of death was approximately 5 in the morning. The autopsy said he had not suffered. He had not suffered. The coroner was a man named Dr. Heller, who has since moved to Oregon. I called Dr. Heller 3 weeks after the funeral and asked him, "Did he suffer?" He said, "Judith, he did not." I thanked him. I have called him once every year since. He answers every time. My mother's name is Mary Agnes Kerrigan, née Donnelly, of County Mayo originally, of Springfield, Massachusetts, after 1972. She taught 4th grade at the Pownell Elementary School for 31 years. She retired in 2007. She had a small stroke in 2019. The second one was worse. She went into a nursing home in Bennington in 2020, in April. She is still there. She has not always recognized me since 2021. She has, twice, recognized Henry. She has not recognized Diana or Tom or my father in 5 years. Henry has been going to see her every Sunday at 2 p.m. since 2020, with very few exceptions. I have been going every Wednesday at 11 a.m., also with very few exceptions. Henry and I are the ones who went. Diana comes when she can, which is once a year, usually at Christmas. Tom came twice and then stopped. My father wrote a will. He wrote it in 2009, in the office of a lawyer named Wendell St. Clair on Main Street in Bennington. He updated it twice, in 2012 and in 2016. The final version left the house and the 17 acres to the 4 children in equal shares, with the provision that the children would form a limited liability company to hold and maintain the property, with my father as the initial manager, my brother Henry as manager after my father, and me as third. The will was witnessed by Wendell and by his secretary. The will was also signed, separately, on a separate page, by each of the 4 children acknowledging the arrangement. We each signed it in the office on the same afternoon in October 2016. My father was 66 then. He was still sharp, he was still working, he was still in his own house. We all signed. The LLC was formally created on February 8, 2019, 3 months after my father died. It is registered with the Vermont Secretary of State as Kerrigan Family Holdings, LLC. The members are the 4 of us, in equal shares. The original operating agreement, prepared by Wendell St. Clair's firm, is dated February 8, 2019, and is 42 pages. It has been amended, by signed writing, 6 times. The first amendment was a correction of the legal description of the parcel. The second was an addition of a special assessment clause for capital improvements. The third was the addition of me as a co-manager. The fourth was a clarification of the manager's succession. The fifth was unrelated, and I do not remember it. The sixth was the addition of a member buyout procedure for any member who wanted to be bought out. I signed Amendment 6 in 2022. I am aware of Amendment 6. I am aware by the Wednesday before the wedding of Amendments 1 through 6. I am not aware by that Wednesday of Amendments 7, 8, and 9. I will become aware by 10:45 that morning. My siblings, Henry is 49. He lives in Burlington, Vermont, where he is a senior project manager at a structural engineering firm called Conkle and Associates. Conkle and Associates employs 26 people and does work on bridges, large buildings, and historical masonry. Henry has been there since 2001. Henry's divorce from his first wife Lydia was finalized in 2020 after a separation that began in 2018 and a contested process that lasted 18 months. Lydia got the house in South Burlington. They had no children. Henry kept his 401 Christ, and his truck and his dog, a yellow lab named Otis, who is now 11, and who sleeps on Henry's bed every night. Henry and Lydia did not part on friendly terms. Lydia is an attorney. She has an office on St. Paul Street in Burlington. I will tell you why I am telling you this. I am telling you this because 2 years after a divorce like that, a man in his late 40s is a man who is going to say yes to the next person who is warm. Marisol Castro was warm. Marisol Castro remains warm. The warmth is not the problem. The problem is what the warmth is built on. Diana is 47. She lives in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. She is the head chef at a restaurant called Quincy Street, which is a small 8-table place on a side street and which has been written up 3 times. Diana did not go to culinary school. Diana was a pastry sous at Gramercy Tavern for 5 years before she opened her own place. Diana has cooked every Kerrigan Thanksgiving since 2012, with one exception, which was 2020, when the city was closed. Diana is not part of the LLC drama. Diana does not read paperwork well. Diana does not read paperwork at all. Diana will not in this story read the operating agreement or the amendments. Diana will be a witness when I need a witness in a specific capacity. Diana is being a good sister by showing up on Saturday and by cooking, and she will tell you if you ask her that she is being a good sister, she is correct. Tom is 44. He lives in Washington, D.C. Tom is a partner at a litigation firm called Rubenstein, Carden, and Decker. Tom went to Georgetown Law. Tom was a federal prosecutor for 6 years before he went into private practice. Tom handles white-collar criminal defense. Tom is the one in the family who can read an amendment and tell you whether it would hold up in court. Tom was at his second wedding anniversary in Sonoma on the Wednesday before my brother's wedding. Tom would have been the right person to be in the kitchen on that Wednesday. Tom would have had me arrested for obstruction of justice if I had read him in 10 minutes. Tom is not in this story in person. Tom is in this story on speakerphone at 6 p.m. that Wednesday, after I have already taken 2 of the steps I will tell you about. I am telling you this so you know I did not do the next part alone. I am 52. I do not have a husband. I have a partner, a man named Paul, who is a preservation carpenter in Charlestown. We have been together for 11 years. We do not live together. We have discussed it. We have decided we will not. He owns a triple-decker in Somerville. He is 58. He is a Fletcher. He makes arrows by hand. He sells them at a shop on Charles Street. He charges $48 for a dozen cedar arrows. He has a waiting list of 14 months. He is the calmest person I have ever known. I would not have gotten through September of 2024 without him. He is also the only person who understood, when I called him at 10:53 on the Wednesday morning, that I had just found something that was a structural problem, not a personal one. He said, "Judith, read me the documents." I read him the documents. He said, "Call Tom, call me back." He did not call me sweetie. He did not ask how I felt. He said, "Call Tom, call me back." I love him for that. Marisol Castro was born Marisol Castro in White Plains, New York, in 1985. She grew up in Yonkers. She graduated from Pace University with a bachelor's in hospitality management in 2007. She worked at a wedding venue in Westchester called the Garrison for 7 years. She left the Garrison in 2014, in February, after a relationship with the venue owner that ended when his wife discovered the relationship, and the venue owner offered Marisol a severance of 1 month and a non-disclosure agreement. Marisol took the severance. Marisol signed the NDA. Marisol went to work for an event planner called Helena Voss, who runs a company called Voss Weddings, for 3 years. She left Voss in 2007. She started her own company in 2018 called Marisol and Company Events. The company is a sole proprietorship registered with New York State. It does wedding planning. It does corporate events. It does bar and bat mitzvahs. The company has a website. The website is In Places Well Written. In Places it is not. Marisol has been married twice before Henry. Her first husband was a man named Sean Devlin of Terrytown. They were married in 2010, separated in 2012, divorced in 2013. She retained the apartment in Terrytown for 18 months of the marriage. The apartment was in Sean's name. She convinced Sean to add her to the deed in 2011. She convinced Sean to refinance the apartment in 2012 and to take out a home equity line of credit for what she told him was renovation of the kitchen. The renovation of the kitchen cost $22,000. The HELOC was for $110,000. Of that $110,000, 22 went to the kitchen, 65 went to what the refinance stated was debt consolidation, and 23 went to a checking account at Chase in the name of Marisol and Company Events. Sean found out about the 23 when they separated. The litigation lasted 20 months. The settlement was confidential. Sean kept the apartment. Marisol kept the 23. Her second husband was a man named Caleb Marsh of Hastings-on-Hudson. They were married in 2016, separated in 2018, divorced in 2009. Caleb owned a small construction company, Marsh Brothers Construction, an LLC, with his brother. Caleb was the operations manager. Marisol was the bookkeeper. The LLC had a line of credit against Caleb's house in Hastings. Marisol, as bookkeeper, opened a second line of credit against the same house, in Caleb's name, without his signature being verified by the bank. The bank allowed this. The bank should not have allowed this. The second line of credit was for $90,000. Of the 90, 42 went to legitimate business expenses. 48 went to a brokerage account in Marisol's name at Fidelity. Caleb found out about the 48 when the divorce was filed. The divorce was settled in 29. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement. Caleb kept the house. Marisol kept the 48. I know all of this. I know it because I am an architect, and architects read things. I read the New York State marriage license records. I read the Westchester County court records. I read the filings on the New York Secretary of State's website. I read the credit report that Paul pulled, with Marisol's permission, when she applied to rent the carriage house on the property for the rehearsal dinner in 2024. Paul pulled the credit report. He pulled it because Marisol said she had a 720. The 720 was true. The credit report was in places generous. The credit report was in places missing things. Paul is a Fletcher. Paul has made a career of noticing very small, very precise things about how an object is built. Paul read the credit report the way he would read a longbow. He found the missing limbs. He told me, I want to tell you what I knew when Henry called me, in mid-December of 2023, and said, Jude, I want to introduce you to someone. I want to tell you what I knew, because what I knew is going to be wrong, and that is going to matter in this story. What I knew when Henry called, Henry had been alone for 3 years. Henry had been working a lot. Henry had been going to his church, a small Episcopal church on Center Street in Burlington, where he had been a member since 2003. Henry had been promoted to senior project manager at Conkle in 2019. Henry had, in 2023, attended the wedding of one of his colleagues, a woman named Joanne Quigley. The wedding was at the Garrison. The Garrison is where Marisol had worked. The wedding was planned by Marisol's successor at the Garrison, a woman named Tess. Marisol was at the wedding as a guest. She had been invited by Joanne. Henry and Joanne had spoken for 2 hours at the reception. Henry met Marisol by the bar. They danced, in Joanne's words to me, twice. Henry asked for her number. Marisol gave it to him. Marisol called him the next morning. They had dinner at Leunig's on Church Street in Burlington the following Tuesday. They saw each other 4 more times in 2 weeks. They were engaged at Christmas, on the carriage house porch of the house in Pownell, by candlelight, in mid-December 2023. I met Marisol at the Bennington Station Cafe, in Bennington, on a Saturday morning in early February of 2024. Henry had asked me to come up. Henry had driven separately. Marisol was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at a table by the window. She had on a green coat. She had on a knit hat. She had on a red lipstick I have come to associate with her, and which I now dislike for reasons you will understand by the end of this story. She stood up when I walked in. She said, You must be Jude. Henry talks about you all the time. She called me Jude. Only Henry calls me Jude. I did not correct her. I have not corrected her on a single thing. I am going to tell you that in the same way the forensic accountant told you she did not fight the POA change. I did not fight small things. I did not fight small things because I was listening. I was listening to the structure. Small things in old houses do not always matter. The big things always matter. I needed to see the big things. The big things I saw in Marisol at that breakfast were, she was careful. She was prepared. She had read the LLC operating agreement before the meeting. She had in fact brought a printed copy, on which I saw a single handwritten note in pencil in the margin, on page 11. The note said, Amendment 7? She closed the binder when I sat down. She did not mention the binder. She did not mention the operating agreement. She asked me about the house. She asked me about my partner. She asked me about Quincy Street. She asked me about my mother. She made me laugh once. She made Henry laugh twice. Henry, who had been cautious through his whole divorce, who had been anxious and slow in the year after the divorce, who had talked to me 3 times on the phone about whether he would ever get married again, was visibly happy. He held her hand across the table. He ate his omelet with his other hand. He called her Sunshine. He said she was Sunshine. I want to tell you about the house, because the house matters and because the way the house was built tells you what was about to be done to it. The house at 1147 Mentor Road was built in 1860. It was built to last. It was built by a farmer who was not a wealthy man, but who understood that the studs he cut would need to hold a roof through 4 winters of Vermont before the next generation arrived. The studs were overbuilt. The summer beam was overbuilt. The foundation was overbuilt. The chimney was overbuilt. Hemon Pratt did not overbuild because he could afford to overbuild. He overbuilt because the building was meant to hold his family for the next 100 years. His family held it for 158 years before my father died. When the LLC was formed in 2019, the 4 of us agreed that the house would be restored, on the structural side by me, in cash flow agreed by the LLC members, in installments of up to $15,000 per year, to be drawn from a separate LLC restoration reserve. I have been drawing on that reserve every year since 2019. I have spent in total $87,400 of the LLC's money on the house. The money has paid for the ridge beam repair, for the 7 oak pegs, for the cedar shingle restoration, for the foundation repointing on the south face, for the chimney shoulder rebuild in 2021, for the cellar window replacements, for the structural assessment in 2022 by the same firm that employs Henry, Conkle and Associates, for which I did not pay the firm, and which Henry told me he had expensed in his role as Conkle employee as a firm donation. The reserve balance as of the last quarterly statement I had seen in 2024 was $28,400. The house was getting closer to where it needed to be. The house was also where we had always gathered. We gathered in November. We gathered at Christmas. We gathered in July for what we called Carrigan Days, which was a misnamed tradition my parents had started in 1978, and which was always in late July, and which involved my father's brothers and their children flying in from Boston and Albany and Hartford, and which involved a cookout on Saturday and a hike on Sunday. The Carrigan Days tradition had narrowed after my father's death to the 4 siblings and our partners and our children, of which there are 4, Henry has none. Diana has a son named Owen, who is 11, and a daughter named May, who is 9. Tom has a son named Theo, who is 7, and I have no children. Carrigan Days in 2023 had 12 people. There were 5 in 2024, including Marisol. There was in 2025, again 5. We will see. The wedding was planned for September 14, 2024. The plan was for the ceremony to be on the lawn at the southwest corner of the house, between the sugar maple and the barn foundation, in the same spot Henry had proposed. The plan was for the reception to be in the tent behind the barn, 240 guests, with Quincy Street catering, and with the same string quartet my parents had hired for their wedding in 1978. The plan was for the rehearsal dinner on Friday at the carriage house on the south side of the property, which had been Henry's bachelor apartment from 2020 to 2022, and which had been, since 2022, an Airbnb rental that I had managed on the side and that I would now give up the proceeds from for one weekend. The plan was for me to officiate. Henry had asked me to officiate. I was not a minister. I had been a justice of the peace in Massachusetts since 2011. I have officiated 3 weddings. I was going to officiate this one. The plan was for me to do the structural walkthrough on Wednesday and Thursday of the wedding week. The plan was for Friday to be the rehearsal. The plan was for Saturday to be the wedding. The plan was a good plan, I want to say that. The plan was a good plan, and it was the right plan. There was a small structural change Marisol had requested in June, in writing, to the day of timeline, that I had approved. There was a small change she had requested in July, also in writing, to the ceremony order, that I had also approved. There was a small change in August, also in writing, to the floral selection, that Henry approved without showing it to me, that I learned about when I arrived Wednesday. None of these changes mattered by themselves. None of these changes is what I am going to tell you about. What I am going to tell you about is something that has nothing to do with the wedding. I drove up on Tuesday night, on the 9th of September. I slept in the master bedroom, on the same bed my parents had shared, which had been replaced in 2020 with a sleep number that I had bought with my own money, and which I had put on the same hand-built frame my father had built in 1978. The frame was a 5-inch cherry post bed with through tenons and walnut pegs. My father had cut the cherry from a tree on the property that he had cut down himself in 1975, in the second winter after they had bought the property back from my father's aunt. The tree had stood on the southwest corner of the property, in what is now the lawn where the wedding was supposed to take place. I woke up at 6:30. I made coffee in the kitchen using the pour-over that has been in the kitchen since I was in college. The kettle was a 1972 Revere ware kettle that was my mother's. The mugs were 4 mugs of mismatched pottery. The kitchen smelled of coffee, of toast from the previous owner's daughter who was staying in the carriage house for the night, of the cold stone of the cellar stairs, of cedar from the closet in the entry, of which I am going to tell you more in a moment, and of something faint that was not normal. The faint smell was vinegar. I noted it. The vinegar smell had not been in this house for years. The house in my father's time did not smell like vinegar. The house smelled like wood and wood smoke and warm brick, and the cedar of the closet and the soft old carpet on the stairs and the slight dust of the plaster. It smelled like a barn. I walked through the house. I was on my knees in the dining room within 5 minutes on the wide pine floor, with a flashlight in one hand and a tape measure in the other. The dining room window, the one with the 38 3/4 inch sill, had been moved. I do not mean the casing, I do not mean the trim, I mean the bottom rail of the sash had been painted black, where it had previously been unpainted oak. There was a thin black line across the front of the sash, about 1/8 of an inch wide. The line was at the height where dust settles. It had the texture of paint. The window had been worked on. I asked Henry. Henry did not know. Marisol said she had hired a handyman, a man named Brian Sewall of Bennington, to do some last-minute painting and hardware polishing. The painting had been done in July. I had been in the house in July, on Kerrigan days, and the painting had not been done then. Brian Sewall had, according to his invoice, painted the windows in August. The handyman did not paint sash bottoms. Sash bottoms are paintable, but they are the one part of a window a preservation person does not paint, because the paint on the bottom of the sash causes the sash to bind in the stop bead. The bottom of a sash is the part of a window you leave unpainted. Brian Sewall had painted it. Marisol had paid him to paint it. Marisol had not told me. Marisol had not told Henry. Marisol had not told anyone. She had hired a man to do something to this house that she knew I would notice. I noticed it. I want to take you through the next 2 hours slowly, because the next 2 hours are when the quiet stops being about housekeeping and starts being about paper. At 8:15, I went up to the attic. The attic is a half-story with a knee wall at the front and back, and is accessed by a narrow staircase behind the upstairs bathroom. The attic has a window in the east gable that I had restored in 2015. The attic is where the LLC records are kept. They are kept in a green painted metal ammunition box that my father had used when he was in the Army Reserves in the late 1970s. The box was on a pine shelf, on top of a stack of original Heman Pratt land deeds from 1860. I had last opened the box in 2022, when I signed Amendment 6. I had last seen the operating agreement and the prior 5 amendments in 2022. I went up to the attic to get the operating agreement for Henry's reference. Henry was going to ask me a question about Clause 12. I was going to need the document. I opened the box. The box had 9 documents in it instead of 7. I knew this because I keep a yellow post-it note in the box with the document count handwritten on it. The post-it said 7 documents, last verified the 14th of September 2022. The post-it said 7. There were 9. Document number 1 was the operating agreement. Document number 2 was Amendment 1. Document number 3 was Amendment 2. Document number 4 was Amendment 3. Document number 5 was Amendment 4. Document number 6 was Amendment 5. Document number 7 was Amendment 6. Document number 8 was a piece of paper I had never seen before. Document number 9 was another piece of paper I had never seen before. The 2 new pieces of paper were both on letterhead of a law firm called Bauman, Reyes & Quill, with offices on Main Street in Bennington. The letterhead had a logo. The letterhead said, Real Estate, Wills, Trusts, LLCs, Bennington County since 1984. I had never heard of this firm. I had been in Bennington for 28 years. I had used Wendell St. Clair for my LLC work. I had used a different firm in Boston for my own work. I had never used Bauman, Reyes & Quill. The first piece of paper was a single-page document headed Amendment Number 7 to the Operating Agreement of Kerrigan Family Holdings, LLC. The date was August 2, 2024. The body of the document said, in summary, that the LLC had accepted a new non-member manager, a woman named Marisol Cruz Castro, whose social security number was redacted, whose address was the carriage house on the property at 1147 Mentor Road, who would have authority over all real estate decisions of the LLC, including the leasing, sale, encumbrance, refinancing, and improvement of the property. The signature line of the document was at the bottom right. There were 2 signatures. The first was in Henry's hand. It said, Henry D. Kerrigan, member. The second was in Marisol's hand, as the new manager. It said, Marisol C. Castro, manager. There was no signature of mine. There was no signature of Diana. There was no signature of Tom. There was no signature of Wendell St. Clair. There was a notary's seal. The notary's name was Sandra O'Connor, which is a name I had not seen before, and which I will tell you about later in the story. The second piece of paper was a single-page document headed Amendment Number 8 to the Operating Agreement of Kerrigan Family Holdings, LLC. The date was August 9, 2024. The body of the document said, In summary, that the LLC members had, by unanimous written consent, authorized the manager to obtain a home equity line of credit against the property at 1147 Mentor Road in the amount of $650,000. The proceeds to be used for renovations and improvements to the property, including, but not limited to, the construction of an accessory dwelling unit and a barn event space. The signature line had two signatures. The first was in Henry's hand. The second was in Marisol's hand as manager. The document had a witness line that read, Diana B.C. Aragon, witness. The witness line was not in Diana's hand. I knew Diana's handwriting. I have her Christmas card from 2023 in a drawer. The witness line was in an unsteady hand I did not recognize. I sat on the attic floor for about 10 minutes. I had the flashlight in my hand. I had the two new pieces of paper in the other hand. I had the box of 7 documents in front of me. I did not have my phone with me. I went downstairs. I got my phone. I took photographs of the 2 new pieces of paper in the attic. I put the documents back exactly as I had found them. I put the box back on the shelf. I went back downstairs. I made another cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I want to tell you what I was feeling. I was not angry. Anger is what I feel when someone does something they should have known was wrong. I was not feeling that. I was feeling the feeling I have when I am in a building, and I see a load-bearing post that is missing. There is a particular feeling. It is not panic. It is not anger. It is a kind of vertigo that is internal. It is the feeling of standing in a room and knowing that the thing that was supposed to be holding the room up is no longer there. I had that feeling. I called Paul at 10:53 that morning. I said, Paul, I have found something. Are you free to listen for 90 minutes? He said, I am in the shop. Talk. I read him the documents. He asked me to spell the law firm name. He asked me to read the address. He asked me to read the date. He asked me to read the notary's commission number. He said, Judith, get off the phone. Call Tom. Call the operating agreement attorney, your father's guy. Call Wendell St. Clair. Do not call Marisol. Do not call Henry. Do not file anything. Do not sign anything. Call Wendell. Call Tom, then call me back. I said, Paul. He said, Judith, this is a load-bearing post. Do not touch it until you have read the structure. I said, okay. I called Wendell. I called Tom. I called Paul back. Wendell picked up on the second ring. Wendell is 82. Wendell does not do work for the LLC anymore. Wendell retired his practice in 2020. Wendell still answers his phone. I said, Wendell, I have 2 amendments to the LLC operating agreement that I have never seen. One is dated August 2nd. One is dated August 9th. Both have Marisol Castro's signature. Both have Henry's signature. Neither has my signature. Neither has Diana's signature. Neither has Tom's. Neither has yours. The notary is a woman named Sandra O'Connor. The law firm on the letterhead is Bauman, Reyes, and Quill. There was a long silence. Wendell said, Judith, am I allowed to listen to you talk about this? I said, Wendell, you are the original attorney of record. I am not retaining you. I am asking you as the drafting attorney whether you have ever heard of this firm. He said, I have not. He said, Judith, the amendment process, as drafted by me, requires unanimous written consent. 2 signatures is not enough. You have 4 members. 2 signatures is not unanimous. I said, Wendell, the amendment says Marisol is a non-member manager. Even if Henry signed, even if Diana signed, even if Tom signed, the addition of a non-member manager requires an amendment to the operating agreement, which is unanimous written consent of all members, and which is what I just told you. I said, Wendell, is the amendment valid? He said, Judith, I am not your counsel. I will not give you a legal opinion. I will tell you this. The amendment is facially deficient. There are 4 members. There are 2 signatures. The amendment is not unanimous. I said, Wendell, would you testify to that in court? He said, Judith, of course I would. I am the drafting attorney. I said, Thank you, Wendell. He said, Judith, do not do anything rash. I said, Wendell, I am not rash. I have not been rash in 28 years of practice. I am going to call Tom now. Then I am going to make you proud. He laughed. He said, Be safe. I called Tom. Tom answered on the 3rd ring. Tom was at his in-laws' Sonoma ranch. Tom had the annual barbecue on the 2nd Sunday of September. I said, Tom, are you sitting down? He said, I am drinking beer and watching my son chase chickens. What's wrong? I read him the documents. He was quiet for 3 full minutes. Then he said, "Judy, read me the witness signature again." I read it. He said, "Do you recognize that handwriting?" I said, "Number." He said, "Send me a photograph. Send me both pages. Do not send them via text. Send them via the firm's secure portal. The firm is Rubenstein, Cardin, and Decker. The contact is my assistant, Kara. Tell Kara to put them in the J7 folder." I said, "Tom," he said, "do not call Henry. Do not call Marisol. Do not call anyone. Do not call Diana. Call me back at 6 p.m. tonight, your time. Have your telephone on speaker. Have your phone in front of you. Have the documents in front of you. Have a pad of paper in front of you. I will be calling you from the porch in Sonoma. I will have my wallet open and my pad open. I will have my wife in the room. We will go through what we have. We will decide what to do. We will not do anything tonight that we cannot undo. Do you understand?" I said, "I understand." He said, "Judy." I said, "I know." He said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too." I called Paul back at 11:05. I told him Wendell's answer and Tom's instructions. Paul said, "Judy, are you eating?" I said, "Number?" He said, "Eat something. There is bread in the kitchen. There is butter in the butter bell. There is coffee in the pot. Eat." I ate 2 pieces of bread with butter. I drank a cup of coffee. I called Tom back at 6 p.m. I am going to tell you what Tom and I found, because what Tom and I found was not just 2 amendments, but a pattern. I am going to go through the findings in order. Some of the numbers are exactly what they were. Some of the names have been changed where I have been able to reach an agreement with the parties. Most have not been changed. First, the amendments. By the end of the night, Tom and I had identified 5 unauthorized amendments to the operating agreement. 3 were in the ammunition box. 2 were not. The 2 that were not had been filed by Tom's paralegal from the rubber-stamped copies that Marisol had provided to her through a process server the morning after Henry had been served with Marisol's counterclaims on October 10, 2024, the day I am not going to describe here. The 5 amendments were numbered 7 through 11. I have them in my office, in a folder, in a green-painted metal ammunition box identical to the one in the attic. Tom suggested I keep them. I have kept them. The 5 amendments, in summary. Amendment 7, dated August 2, 2024, adds Marisol Casprastro as a non-member manager with authority over all real estate decisions of the LLC, including, but not limited to, the leasing, sale, encumbrance, refinancing, and improvement of LLC real property. This is the one I found in the attic. The 2 signatures are Marisol's and Henry's. No member counter-signatures. Witnessed by Sandra O'Connor, notary. Recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State on August 5. Amendment 8, dated August 9, 2024, authorizes the manager to obtain a home equity line of credit against the property at 1147 Mentor Road in the amount of $650,000. The proceeds to be used for renovations and improvements to the property, including but not limited to the construction of an accessory dwelling unit and a barn event space. This is the second one I found in the attic. The 2 signatures are Marisol's and Henry's. Witnessed by Sandra O'Connor, recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State on August 12. Amendment 9, dated August 16, 2024, provides for a transfer of 22% of Henry's 25% interest in the LLC to Marisol, in exchange for consideration of services rendered as manager from August 1, 2024, through the date hereof, valued at $62,300. The 2 signatures are Henry's and Marisol's. The document is witnessed by Sandra O'Connor. It is not recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State. It is held by Bauman, Reyes, and Quill in their file. Tom has a copy. Amendment 10, dated August 23, 2024, provides for a transfer of 14 acres of the 17-acre parcel of the LLC's property to Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC, in exchange for consideration of $100 and other valuable consideration, with the LLC retaining the right of first refusal to repurchase the land at the original sale price plus interest. The 2 signatures are Henry's and Marisol's, witnessed by Sandra O'Connor. Recorded with the Bennington County Clerk on August 26. Tom pulled the recorded copy from the clerk's website that night. The 14 acres include the carriage house, the lawn where the wedding was supposed to be, and the entire site of the 1860 post and beam barn foundation that my father walked me across in 1993 to show me where the barn foundation had been. Amendment 11, dated August 30, 2024, provides for the LLC to indemnify and hold harmless Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC from any claim, demand, or cause of action arising from the acquisition or operation of the transferred parcel, including but not limited to environmental, zoning, title, and tort claims. The two signatures are Henry's and Marisol's, witnessed by Sandra O'Connor, not recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State, held by Bauman, Reyes, and Quill. I am going to tell you what this set of documents would do, in the order in which it would do it if no one in my family intervened. I want to walk you through this carefully, because it is the kind of thing an architect would notice in a building. A series of small changes, each of which looks harmless in isolation, which together quietly rearrange the load-bearing structure of the whole. The First Amendment would put Marisol in a position where she could speak for the LLC to any bank, any vendor, any contractor, any government office, on any matter touching the property. The Second Amendment would allow her to take out a $650,000 HELOC. The Third Amendment would give her 22% of the LLC interest, which, combined with Marisol's growing role as manager, would put her in a position where she could dictate terms to the LLC at any future meeting. The Fourth Amendment would give her LLC the carriage house, the lawn, the barn foundation at a price of $100 and other valuable consideration, which, given that the carriage house alone has an assessed value of $220,000, and the lawn has an assessed value of $140,000, and the barn foundation has an assessed value of $35,000, would have been a transfer of approximately $395,000 of value for $100. The Fifth Amendment would protect her LLC from the LLC's later attempts to claw it back. Taken together, in the order in which they were filed, with the recording dates I gave you, the documents would have done the following things to the Kerrigan Family Holdings LLC. They would have installed a non-member manager with unilateral real estate authority. They would have encumbered the LLC's only significant asset with a $650,000 line of credit, on which the proceeds, if not drawn, sit as a credit line, and on which, if drawn, are proceeds of the LLC that the LLC cannot access without the manager's cooperation. They would have given the manager a 22% LLC interest for services valued by her own estimate at $62,300, which is a number that does not correspond to anything I have ever seen in an LLC operating agreement I have read. They would have transferred 14 acres of the LLC's land to an LLC she controlled for $100. They would have indemnified that LLC against any claim the LLC could later make. I want to tell you what I felt when I read those documents in my father's house on a Wednesday night in September of 2024. I felt what I had felt when I was called, in 2015, to consult on a building in Williamstown that had been purchased by a woman named Patty Hurst's cousin, who had hired a contractor who had not pulled the right permits, and who had, by the time I was called, sold the building to a man who had sold the building to a woman who had defaulted on a mortgage held by a bank in Albany, and who had not, in any of those transactions, pulled a single permit for any of the work that had been done in the building. The building was, on paper, a beautiful federal townhouse. The building was, in fact, a building where every interior partition had been removed without a permit, where the second-floor joists had been cut to run plumbing, where the chimney shoulder had been removed for a flue that had not been installed. The building was, in fact, a building that was about to fall down. The transactions were, on paper, 3 simple sales. The transactions were, in fact, a quiet disassembling of the structure of a building that had been standing for 218 years. The building fell down in February of 2016 at 4 in the morning when no one was watching. The building fell down because nobody had read the structure. I felt that. I want to tell you about the HELOC because the HELOC is the load-bearing part of this story. The HELOC was filed on the property at 1147 Mentor Road on August 16, 2024, with M&T Bank, in an application signed by Henry Kerrigan and Marisol C. Castro as manager. The application was for $650,000. The application was approved on August 23rd. The line was opened on August 26th. The line was drawn, in total, to the amount of $312,400 between August 29th and October 2nd. The draws were in order: $112,000 to a checking account at M&T Bank, in the name of Marisol and Company Events, $78,000 to a credit card payoff for a John Lewis Platinum card, in the name of Marisol C. Castro, $38,000 to a contractor I do not know, in Bennington, called Northshire Home Improvements, who I have not been able to identify, $48,000 to a brokerage account at Fidelity, in the name of Marisol C. Castro. $6,400 to what appears to be personal travel. The remaining $337,600 was, as of the last statement I saw, undrawn. I want to tell you what was in the file of the law firm called Bauman, Reyes and Quill. Tom's paralegal, Kara, called me at 9:06 the next morning, with Tom on the line. Kara had pulled the firm's file from the Vermont courts. The firm's file contained, in summary, 4 things. First, a draft of the LLC operating agreement, dated 2015, never executed, prepared by a lawyer named Reuben Bauman, who is the senior partner. Second, a copy of the executed operating agreement from 2019, with a yellow sticky note in the margin that read, Henry, has J/H/T/S signed, meaning me, Henry, Tom, and Diana. Third, a notepad page on which Reuben Bauman had written, by hand, the words, Marisol, make 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, get HO to sign, notarize each, file, 8 halves, 8 ninths, 8 sixteenths, 8 23rds, 8 30ths, record, 8 fifths, 8 twelfths, 8 26ths. Fourth, a single-page invoice, dated August 30th, from Bauman Reyes and Quill to Marisol C. Castro for $1,800, marked paid. I sat at the kitchen table. I had the photographs of the 2 amendments. I had the photographs of the deed filing. I had the photographs of the HELOC application. I had the photographs of the law firm's invoice. I had the photographs of Reuben Bauman's notepad. I had a copy of the original operating agreement which I had taken out of the ammunition box and put in my bag. I sat at the kitchen table. It was 9:18 on Wednesday morning, September 11th, 2024. The wedding was on Saturday. I am going to walk you through what I did over the next 72 hours, because I want to be clear about the difference between acting on instinct and acting on a reading of the structure. What I did was based on what I had been taught in 28 years of practice. The first rule, never touch a load-bearing element without first inspecting the elements on either side of it. The second, read the documentation before I touch the structure. The third, make sure the people who could be affected by what I was about to do had been informed in writing. The fourth, call the engineer of record before I removed a wall. The fifth, call the building inspector before I started a job. The sixth, keep a record. The seventh, be slow. The eighth, slow wins. The first thing I did, at 9:22 on Wednesday morning, was call Wendell St. Clair. I told him that I had retained a litigation attorney, Tom. I told him that I needed him to be on call as the drafting attorney of the original operating agreement. I told him that I would be asking him to provide a sworn affidavit by Friday at 5 p.m., attesting that, in his professional opinion, the 5 amendments were facially deficient under the original operating agreement. Wendell said he would provide the affidavit. He said he would charge the LLC for it. I said, charge us. We need to be made whole. The LLC will charge you back, Marisol, he said. Judith, do not joke about this, I said. I am not joking. I am billing her estate when she is done. The second thing I did was call Paul. I told him I was going to start executing. He said, Judith, before you execute, sleep on it. Sleep is part of the process. I said, Paul, I cannot sleep. I have been up since 6. The wedding is on Saturday. He said, then sleep on Wednesday and Thursday. Do not sleep on Friday. I said, I will try. He said, trust the structure. Trust your reading of it. You are not wrong. The third thing I did was call Marisol's home phone line. I left a voicemail that said, Marisol, this is Judith, Henry's sister. I am in town early for the wedding, and I would love to take you to breakfast at the Bennington Station Cafe tomorrow morning at 8. We can walk over if you want. No agenda, just sister-in-law time. I did not say anything else. I did not say anything about the LLC. I did not say anything about the law firm. I did not say anything about the HELOC. I left a friendly voicemail. The fourth thing I did was pull the Vermont Secretary of State's online filings. I paid the $18 for the certified copies of Amendments 7 through 10. I also paid the $40 for a certified copy of the LLC's annual report for 2023, which had been filed in February 2024 by Marisol, in her capacity as manager, with an address of the carriage house at 1147 Mentor Road. The annual report was the first time the LLC's annual report had listed a manager other than Henry. I had not known this. I should have known this. I had been a member of the LLC for 6 years and I had not checked the annual report. That was my responsibility. That was on me. I am telling you this because it is true. I am telling you this because the most important part of any reading of a structure is the part where you admit what you did not see. The fifth thing I did was call Tom. Tom had spent the night reading the documents. Tom had by Wednesday morning retained a law firm in Bennington called Lloyd, Hanover and Stern, who do LLC disputes. The senior partner, a woman named Adelaide Hanover, had agreed to be retained by Thursday morning. Adelaide had, by Wednesday afternoon, agreed to draft a verified complaint for breach of fiduciary duty against Marisol and against Reuben Bauman, individually. The complaint was going to be filed in Bennington County Superior Court in the Chancery Division by Thursday at noon. Adelaide had also agreed to draft an emergency motion to suspend Marisol as manager and to freeze the Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC bank account. The motion was going to be filed Thursday morning. Tom had by Wednesday afternoon retained a process server in Bennington named Greg Hurd, who was going to be ready to serve Marisol at the rehearsal dinner on Friday night if the court issued the order. The sixth thing I did was call Conkle and Associates, Henry's employer. I called the office manager, a woman named Marcia Stone, who has run Conkle's Bennington office for 22 years. I told Marcia I needed to speak with the principal, Bill Conkle, on a confidential matter. Bill called me back within an hour. I told Bill that I was concerned about an LLC matter that involved an employee who had an ownership dispute with a family member. Bill asked if it was Henry. I said it was. Bill said he would suspend Henry's user access to the firm's systems until the matter was resolved. I thanked him. I told him I would appreciate it. I told him I would provide him with a copy of the original operating agreement with Henry's consent at the appropriate time. Bill said, "Judith, take care of Henry." I said, "I will." The seventh thing I did was call a contractor I know in Pownall, a man named Dale Williams, who runs a small excavation and site work company. I asked Dale to come to the property at 9 a.m. on Thursday with a small crew. I told him I needed to install a chain across the carriage house driveway and a no trespassing sign, in advance of an easement dispute that I expected to have with a third party. Dale said he would be there. He brought the chain and the sign. The eighth thing I did was go to the kitchen. I made a coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I wrote a letter to my father. I am not going to read it to you. I am going to tell you that I wrote it and that it was 1 page long and that it was written in pencil. The ninth thing I did was call Henry. Henry was at a job site in Middlebury. I told him, at 9 p.m. on Wednesday night, that I had found some documents in the attic that I needed to discuss with him, and that I wanted him to come to the kitchen at 8 a.m. on Thursday morning, alone, and to leave his phone in the car. Henry said, "Jude, what is this about?" I said, "It is about the house." He said, "Okay." He did not push. He trusts me. He has always trusted me on the house. The 10th thing I did was call Marisol at 7:30 Thursday morning. She did not pick up. She texted back at 7:45. She said, "Hi Jude. Sorry I missed you. I would love breakfast tomorrow." "Friday, can we do Friday?" I said, "Friday morning works, 8:30 at the Bennington station." She said, "Great, see you then." I did not text her back. I put my phone down. On Thursday morning at 8:02 a.m., Henry was in the kitchen. I sat with him. I had the 2 amendments in front of me, with the photographs of the law firm's invoice, with the photographs of Reuben Bauman's notepad, with a copy of the original operating agreement. I had a coffee, I had a pencil, I had a pad of paper, I had 2 hours. Henry, when he saw the 2 amendments, did not speak for 6 minutes. I timed it. I was sitting across from him. I was looking at his face. His face went through 7 expressions in those 6 minutes. I will tell you one of them. He asked me, at minute 6, "Jude, did I sign these?" I said, "Henry, you signed them. The signatures are yours." He looked at the documents. He said, "I would not have signed these." I said, "Henry, you did sign them. They are witnessed by a notary named Sandra O'Connor. They are recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State. They are not contested." He looked at the documents. He said, "She came to me in August. She had 2 papers on her kitchen counter. She said they were wedding-related paperwork. She said the wedding budget had to be expanded because of the catering. She said the additional HELOC was to pay for the catering. I did not read them. I do not read things I am told to sign." I said, "Henry, that is a load-bearing wall. That is what a load-bearing wall looks like when it has been moved." He said, "Jude, I want to be sick." I said, "I want you to be sick on Friday morning, not now. Now we work." We worked until 10:15. We worked through every page. Henry told me where he had been, what she had said, what she had brought him, what she had told him to sign, on which day we had a timeline, we had a pattern, we had a name, we had a law firm, we had a notary, we had a deed filing, we had a HELOC, we had a list of contractors, we had by the time we were done, the file that the court would need on Friday morning. By 10:15, Henry had signed a sworn statement. By 10:15, Henry had revoked the document he had signed in August that gave Marisol authority to act on his behalf with the LLC. By 10:15, Henry had signed the joint emergency motion with me to suspend Marisol as a non-member manager, freeze the Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC bank account, void amendments 7 through 11, and place the LLC in receivership under the management of Wendell St. Clair until the litigation was concluded. By 10:15, Henry had called Wendell and asked Wendell to act as the LLC manager until further notice. By 10:15, Wendell had accepted. By 10:15, Henry had called Tom and told Tom he was going to be deposed by Adelaide Hanover and asked to be deposed Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. after the rehearsal dinner. On Friday morning, at 8:28 a.m., I was sitting at the Bennington Station Cafe with Marisol. She had on a green coat, she had on a red lipstick, she had on a knit hat, she sat down across from me. She smiled, she said, "How are you, Jude?" I said, "Marisol, I am well. How are you?" She said, "I am excited. Saturday is going to be so beautiful." I said, "Marisol, I am going to take off my sister of the groom hat for a moment and ask you a question about the LLC. Her face changed. I am going to describe the change. Her shoulders went back about 1/4 of an inch. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. She was no longer warm. She was careful. She said, "Of course." I said, "Marisol, I found 2 amendments to the operating agreement of Kerrigan Family Holdings, LLC, in the attic ammunition box on Wednesday morning. The amendments are dated August 2nd and August 9th. They have your signature and Henry's signature. They do not have my signature, Diana's signature, or Tom's signature. They are witnessed by a notary named Sandra O'Connor. They are recorded with the Vermont Secretary of State. Have you seen them?" She did not speak for a long time. She was looking at me. She said, "Yes, Jude, I have." I said, "Did you authorize their drafting?" She said, "I did not draft them. A lawyer drafted them." I said, "Marisol, I am going to ask you one more question. Did you know, when you authorized their drafting, that the original operating agreement requires unanimous written consent of all 4 members for any amendment?" She was quiet. She said, "Jude, I believe I have done nothing wrong." I said, "Marisol, that is a lawyer's answer. I am going to ask you, as a person, did you know that unanimous meant unanimous?" She was quiet for a long time. She said, "I believe so." I said, "Thank you, Marisol. I have what I need. I am not going to ask you any more questions." I put my hand up to the waiter. I paid for my coffee. I stood up. She was still sitting at the table. I said, "Marisol, I want to be clear with you about the wedding. The wedding is going to happen on Saturday. The wedding is going to happen without you. You are not welcome in my family's house. You are not welcome in my family's tent. You are not welcome at my brother's altar. The invitation has been rescinded. The dress has been canceled. The contract with your company has been terminated. I am sorry. I am sorry you did this. I am sorry for Henry. I am sorry for what was going to happen to him." She said, "Jude?" I said, "Please leave the table, Marisol. I do not want to make a scene." She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the cafe. The waiter watched her. I watched her. The waiter said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" I said, "I am fine, thank you." The coffee was lovely. I called Tom at 9:05. I told him what had happened. He said, "Judy, I am so sorry." I said, "Tom, I don't have time to be sorry. We have the wedding on Saturday. I have 46 guests coming. I have a string quartet coming. I have Diana coming. I have Paul coming. I have a ceremony to officiate. I have a brother who needs to walk down an aisle. Is Adelaide ready to file?" He said, "She is." I said, "File." He said, "Filed." I said, "What time was the service?" He said, 8:43 a.m. I said, "Good." He said, "Judy, are you okay?" I said, "Tom, I am not okay. I will be okay." He said, "Will Henry be okay?" I said, "Henry will be okay. Henry has his dog. Henry has his mother. Henry has his brother. Henry has his sisters. Henry has his job, which he will not lose. Henry will be okay." Marisol was served with the court order at the front door of the carriage house at 12:15 that afternoon. She was served by Greg Hurd, who was a great choice for a process server because he had the right height and the right demeanor. The court order suspended her as a non-member manager. The court order froze the bank account of Marisol and Company Real Estate LLC. The court order placed Kerrigan Family Holdings, LLC under the management of Wendell St. Clair. The court order required Marisol to surrender all LLC records in her possession to the LLC manager within 72 hours. Marisol was represented at the service by a lawyer named Cecily Marsh, who is no relation to Caleb. Cecily was in the driveway when Greg arrived. Cecily accepted service. Cecily did not say a word. Cecily left. Greg Hurd sent me a photograph of the service on his phone. The wedding happened on Saturday, September 14th, 2024. There were 46 guests. There was a string quartet. There was a tent. There was Quincy Street catering. Diana had, in the 72 hours before, redone the catering for 46 rather than 240. Diana had done this without complaint. Diana had done this without looking at me. Diana had done this in the kitchen of the house on Friday afternoon, while Henry and I were with Tom in the dining room. There was no rehearsal dinner at the carriage house on Friday. There was instead a quiet family dinner on the back porch of the main house, with lobster rolls from a place in Manchester, Vermont, that had been my father's favorite, and that Henry remembered. There was no reception for 240. There was a reception for 46 in the same tent, with the same flowers, with the same string quartet, with no father of the bride dance and no first dance, because Marisol had been the bride, and there was no bride. There was, instead, Henry, and Henry's best man, and Henry's sister who was officiating, and Henry's mother who was in a wheelchair, who had been driven up from the nursing home by Henry's sister Diana, in the back of Diana's Subaru, who had said twice during the ceremony, "The lights are off, I can't see them," who had held my hand at the end of the ceremony, who had said, "Judith, who is the bride?" I had said, "Mother, there is no bride tonight. There is Henry." She had said, "Henry, sweetheart." He had said, "Hi, Mom." She had said, "Are you happy?" He had said, "Yes, Mom, I am happy." She had said, "Good. The lights are off." It is now late September of 2024. I am at my drafting table in Boston. The window is open. The harbor smell is coming in. The roofing crew 2 blocks over is finishing a job they started in August, and the pneumatic nailer has been going since 6. I have the ammunition box open on the table in front of me. I have the 7 original documents in their order. I have the 5 unauthorized amendments in their own folder. I have the photographs of the law firm's invoice, of the notepad page, of the deed filing, of the HELOC statement, of the legal notice from Cecily. I have Wendell's affidavit. I have Tom's trial brief. I have the certificate from the Vermont Secretary of State that the LLC has been restored to its original members. I have a copy of the bond I posted with the court on Saturday morning for $5,000, which the court accepted, which allowed Henry's petition to be heard on an emergency basis. I have a check from the LLC for $17,812, which is the total amount Marisol had drawn from the HELOC by the time of the court order, which the court ordered to be returned to the LLC with interest by November 1st. I have the letter Marisol's lawyer Cecily sent to Tom on September 30th, in which Cecily offered, on Marisol's behalf, to return the funds in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. Tom had responded on October 1st, in one line. "Cecily, my sister will not be signing any non-disclosure agreement. We will be seeing you in court." I have in the bottom of the ammunition box the original post-it note I had put in 2022, with the document count handwritten on it. I have written below the original count, in pencil, 12 documents verified the 14th of September 2024, JHC. I am telling you this story because there is a kind of quiet that only happens in old houses, when you have been doing the careful work for years, and you know where the load-bearing posts are, and you know where the original beams are, and you know which walls can be moved and which walls cannot, and you know that the wall you are looking at is not moving, and you know also that the wall is in fact moving, because the wall you are looking at is the wall that someone else has moved without telling you. There is a hollow sound when you knock on the surface. There is a hollow sound in the family. There is a hollow sound when you tap the LLC paperwork the way you tap the masonry. I heard the hollow sound. I read the documentation. I called the engineer. I called the building inspector. I called the lawyer. I called my brother. I called my brother again. I called my brother's best man. I called the contractor. I drove to the house. I pulled the documents. I read them. I checked the signatures. I checked the dates. I checked the recording numbers. I called the Secretary of State. I called the county clerk. I pulled the deeds. I pulled the permits. I found 5 unauthorized amendments. I found a $650,000 HELOC. I found a 14-acre deed transfer. I found the woman who had done all of this. I found the lawyer who had helped her do it. I found the notary who had stamped the pages. I found the bank that had funded the line. I did not find in any of those documents anything about a wedding. If this story moved you, tap like. It tells the channel that quiet is welcome here. If you want the next one in your feed the morning it drops, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I will see you on Sunday. The next story in the description is about a sister I almost lost to a similar thing. You can read it, but I think you know how it ends before I do.